Hi, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the webinar today. I'm Mark Romano, the Senior Director of Channels and Alliances. I'm with Jose Barajas, who is our wizard of engineering, and he'll be speaking a little bit later on in the presentation. We're going to talk about Adversarial Exposure Validation platform, how Attack IQ is launching that into the marketplace, and we're going to start here at the beginning, so that we understand where our problems are and how we're going to solve for those. So I'm going to go ahead and shut off my camera, and we can just focus on, hopefully, the things I'm saying and some of the slides. I try to keep these as light as possible. They do get a little deeper as we go into this, but let's go ahead and get started and have some fun today. So organizations have three overarching priorities that they're dealing with. They want to manage risk, which means also having an understanding of both the threats they face, also the vulnerabilities they have. So under the cyber risk management, we'll be working with customers to identify and assess and mitigate those cyber threats, managing the third party and supply chain risks. Sorry, I have a helicopter going over, so hopefully that's not too loud, as well as ensuring compliance. The cyber resilience and incident readiness is also a major piece of this puzzle, which is developing the testing for incident response plans, some of the cyber crisis management and business continuity planning, as well as making sure that their tabletop exercises, the red team exercises, and rapid recovery is all in play. One of the big ones that I think tends to get forgotten is taking a look at cybersecurity budget as well as the ROI that goes into that mechanism. So working with our customers and the CISOs in balancing cybersecurity investments with the business needs. It's going to be key for them to understand where this comes into play, where adversarial exposure validation comes into play, and how they can demonstrate the cybersecurity ROI to the board and stakeholders. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this as we go in. So looking at the challenge, this endless reactive cycle, has CISOs navigating an increasingly complex security landscape. The attack surface is growing exponentially. We know that. It's driven by cloud adoption, remote work, some third-party integrations, as well as the expansion of IT environments. Knowing that every new asset or identity or dependency introduces risk into that network causes the security teams to sort of drown in tool sprawl, where they might have dozens or sometimes hundreds of overlapping controls that will leave critical gaps in play. At the same time, we've got adversaries adapting faster than security teams can keep up. So ransomware groups, just like everybody else, now operate like enterprises. There are supply chain attacks, and threat actors are starting to leverage AI to scale operations. So just as corporations use AI, the hackers and the adversaries are doing the same thing. So what's the reality of this? Static security controls and periodic assessments really don't stand a chance against this constantly evolving threat landscape. Finally, there's this compliance matrix. There's frameworks like NIST and ISO and others that provide guidance, but they're not really designed to validate real-world security effectiveness. The regulators, auditors, and board members are demanding this tangible proof, the measurable risk exposure, showing the clear security gaps, to understand how these risks impact the business outcomes, which, going back to the last slide, will validate the budget that needs to be spent. So CISOs aren't just responsible for reducing risk anymore. They also have to translate the security performance into a business value. The challenge is more than just finding the exposures. It's about this continuous validating of the security effectiveness and making security outcomes quantifiable, actionable, and always business relevant. So the questions that companies you work with continue, and it's a place where you can really shine as the trusted advisor. Test selection and execution is always helpful, determining what test should be run in a particular environment, identifying where in a customer's environment these tests should be executed, understanding how to run them safely. And I'll talk about that in a minute because that's really important here as well. The threat landscape is essential in identifying which adversaries are targeting the environment and to assess real-world attack scenarios to validate the effectiveness of the defenses that have been put into play. Patch and control strategy is always a challenge. What patches are actually necessary to stop these adversaries? Which existing controls are ineffective against actual threats? And then finally, the issue of misallocating resources by patching vulnerabilities that are already covered by existing controls and addressing those critical gaps where the defenses are weak. So those are some of those areas that we need to start to answer a little bit better for the customers, and hopefully the tool sets will show you will do that as well and sort of bring these thoughts to mind. So as customer environments expand, traditional attack surface management, vulnerability scanning, and some of the exposure management tools can become inadequate. They give endless alerts, and I don't know how many of you have looked at log files, but you can kind of get a sense of what that looks like. And they don't necessarily provide a threat context to differentiate critical risks from the noise level that's out there. At the same time, the attack surface itself is somewhat spiraling out of control. So I'll give you some stats here. In 2023 alone, we've seen over 26,000 vulnerabilities. Many have not even appeared on the CISA known exploitation vulnerabilities list. Not necessarily uncommon. Some have to be reported, some don't. But there's a huge number that are out there that are not necessarily known about. On top of this, a typical organization faces about 15,000 exploitable exposures. Less than 1% of its detection rules actually work well. And we're on track for more than half of these attack surfaces to be unpatchable within the next few years. So relying on outdated ASM tools means we are actually missing threats and spending time on alerts that are things we don't need to spend time on, and failing to address vulnerabilities that really matter. Here's where I'm going to get to a couple of things I mentioned earlier. So existing AP task solutions are not necessarily cutting it either. They use potentially risky exploits that can disrupt a production system and can't be easily deployed at scale, especially when they're done once a year. So you're really not seeing a continuous flow of information that a company needs. They're also not built for control testing like detection engineering, because they don't do the continuous validation. So we need to make sure that we're taking a look at that as well with our customer base. And most importantly, these tools miss intelligence and threat context. They don't actually factor in whether a given vulnerability is actively exploited by the threat groups, but most likely to target you or in your industry. So you really want to know who's attacking you. And I'll get into that a little bit as we go forward in this as well. So there's the doom and gloom speech. Now we know where the problem is. So let's try and move forward into how we can solve some of the problems I just talked about. And that's where you get to become the trusted advisor. So understanding those problems will really set you up in the sales environment to become that knowledgeable person working with CISOs and other people in the IT community, that you understand what they're going through. So once solutions are employed out there, they need to stay resilient. And a solid plan that you build with your customer can leave them feeling assured with the solutions and your engagement, so that they know that their investment is appropriate, what they've spent is actually doing the job. Okay, so we're going to look at this slide a little bit differently. So I normally, you normally go left to right. This slide does this a little backwards. So we're going to be doing this from right to left. So on the right-hand side, you actually see, whoops, I'm sorry. There we go. Oh, I'm slipping slides here. Sorry about that. There we go. So what you're actually seeing is, what do I test over on the right-hand side? That's that exposure validation that we're all very, very, very familiar with. Traditionally, security teams operate on that right side of the timeline. They'll conduct breach and attack simulations or pen tests, but only after threats become apparent. To be more reactive, the organizations need to introduce attack surface scanning to spot those known exposures earlier. This still doesn't necessarily account for the actual tactics, techniques, and procedures, those TTPs, that attackers are always using out in the wild. That real shift to the left comes from integrating live threat intelligence. And rather than scanning blindly, we can now prioritize exposures based on whether they align with the adversarial behaviors. So let me give you an example. If you're Bank of America, naturally you'd love to know how this is affecting your peers. So like JP Morgan and Barclays or other banks, were they compromised? What TTPs were used against them? And this key gives you and your customer a real actionable insight into what to fix first and why. Again, this allows for putting the money in the right place. And that also includes the human, because they do cost money, and we want to make sure that they're focusing on the things that need to be fixed first. So as we push further to the left on this slide, it leaves you asking, how can we predict where attackers might strike before they've even shown up? And that's the goal of predictive posture validation. So we analyze indicators of activity that reveal adversaries' potential moves. So by the time they show up on a customer's doorstep, your customer already has hardened their defenses against those. In other words, it's about staying one step ahead and sort of moving away from the reactive posture post-breach cleanup toward a proactive, intelligence-driven security stance. All right, here we go. Here comes the big slide of the day. So this is looking at Attack IQ Adversary Exposure Validation platform. I'm going to go through sort of the benefits of it, but I want to kind of start left to right. So over on the left-hand side, the customer ecosystem is indicated there, and it's SIMs and EDRs and other kinds of things that are in that ecosystem. But we need two more things that need to be added to that. So there's vulnerability data and cyber threat intelligence. All of that will feed into what you're seeing as the Attack IQ AEV platform, which includes a command center and our three product lines, depending on which product line best fits that customer need, from enterprise down to flex, and creates an adversary exposure validation. That pushes us over into that exposure management area, which I'll talk about now, and finally over to the right-hand side, which is what we really are attempting to do. So we want to uncover gaps here before attackers strike. So continuously discovering assets, vulnerabilities, and misconfigurations across the environment to eliminate blind spots and to reduce risk. The test controls with real-world scenarios emulate the latest adversary behaviors to ensure your defenses are prepared for those threats that most matter to the organization. We also need to get prioritized and aligning with MITRE ATT&CK recommendations based on the most critical exposures and spending time and resources where they have the greatest impact. So if we can align against the MITRE ATT&CK framework, it allows you and your customers to better prioritize where these things get fixed and when. Turning data into actionable insights receives clear step-by-step remediation guidance to shorten resolution times and quickly strengthen the security posture. And now we're going to go ahead and look upstream, because we always need to report. We need to be able to monitor the improvements that were made at a glance with an exposure management score. Jose is going to show you this in a minute. This enables you to demonstrate the security wins and justify the investments to stakeholders. So rather than just waiting for something to happen, running this continuously and having the progress tracked by using the scoring tool really allows for stakeholders to be able to justify the financial implications of putting these things into play. And then lastly, we need to work to simplify and scale security operations, which means integrating third-party vulnerability scanners to centralize the data, automate repeated tasks, and focus on the strategic improvements. What that essentially does at the end of the day here is allow us to scale offensive testing, to optimize the defensive postures, and to reduce exposure. And that is sort of the crown jewels that we're trying to get to. So you'll see how Attack IQ AEV will allow corporations now to be able to do that in one platform. Continuous threat exposure management, which you guys have probably all heard about, the CTEM management, was coined by Gartner in 2022, and it presents that structural approach for continuously assessing, prioritizing, validating, even remediating exposures in an organization's attack surface. What it doesn't do is actually fix them. It is a framework. It lays out and helps companies make an ever-growing attack surface more manageable. So what we do as Attack IQ is now focus on what Gartner has put out there, which companies are now following that framework to sort of get to the space they need to get to. So I'm going to start at the top with scoping. I'm just going to go through these quickly so that you have an idea of how we look at it. You want to scope the CTEM environment to more personalize it for your corporation's environment. The scoping defines which systems and assets should be included in an individual CTEM program. The prioritizing is based on business objectives and threat environments. On phase 2, which is over here on the discovery side, right-hand side, we want to discover and identify vulnerabilities in a designated system with its assets. The IT piece, security, and business leaders all need to assess the risk exposure. So everybody has a play here. What are we doing about unpatched vulnerabilities? Do we have expired certificates? Do we have weak credentials? You've heard all of these before. And we've seen them over and over again where those need to be taken into account. And this framework allows for that, and we need to be able to test against it to make sure it's done. On phase 3, bottom right, rather than addressing every little gap, the CTEM environment prioritizes the threats based on severity, urgency, and asset value. This will create a prioritization, which is really important for these companies, which ensures the efficient security management as non-patchable attack surfaces are expected to grow significantly, as I mentioned previously. Phase 4, bottom left, on the validation side, the priorities that are established, the organization then needs to validate the security by testing the controls as well as the response capabilities. We've done this for years. People have been very excited about how we do control testing, and it's a very simplified format and becomes much easier with the AEV platform and being able to report upstream as well. So validation methods in this area sort of include ASM and EASM, the digital risk protection services, vulnerability assessments, as well as breach and attack, as I mentioned. So real-world testing includes phishing simulations and infrastructure scans and ensures the security strategies align with the evolving threats. Finally, in phase 5, upper left, the effective CTEM environment requires a sustained organization-wide collaboration. This isn't just taking place in one environment within the company. Security leaders should integrate validation into their prioritization workflow to enhance cybersecurity readiness. This ongoing assessment, training, and strategic investment, the security measures that are in place ensure a proactive adaptive defense. So, how do we handle this from an Attack IQ perspective? We need to show kind of how it works for you in a format that's digestible, and then we'll take you into the demo so you'll be able to see that as well. So continuous threat exposure management allows the customer to access actionable insights to enhance that CTEM strategy and improve the security resilience. We need to continuously discover the attack surface to tailor validation tests to your environment. This is not a one-time thing. It's continuous. From there, we need to visualize exploitable attack paths and address gaps before they can be exploited, and do active threat monitoring. So continuously assess the environment for emerging threats threatening the environment as well. And finally, we need to get to the CTEM analytics, which are required within that framework to access actionable insights to enhance the CTEM strategy and improve security resilience. So that circle you see doesn't just go around once. It goes all the way back to the top and starts over again. And those analytics are essential. At the same time, we need to provide a CISO dashboard. We need to provide the executives with a score-based view that highlights risks, progress, and improvement areas. This is very different from what the technical staffs want to see versus what the CISO needs to see and what they need to bring up to the board. We need to make this as simple as possible for everybody to sort of understand what's going on up at the level where funding occurs. And that funding clearly comes back and is used to manage that environment when they put budgets into place. So we're getting to the end here, and then we're going to get to the demo. So Attack IQ's core strength lies in the continuous validating and optimizing of the customer's defense posture through adversary campaign emulation. So you've heard one, that we do control validation, and now you have an understanding we also do adversary campaign emulation. We leverage both atomic tests, focusing on discrete tactics or techniques. We use full attack graphs that replicate the realistic multi-stage adversarial behavior. The threat-informed testing ensures we're always aligning with real-world attacker TTPs. This makes sure your customers' defenses are ready for the threats that actually do matter. Purple teaming is key here as well. You've heard us talk about this for a number of years, unifying the red and blue teams in a collaborative, iterative process that will steadily refine security controls. We're able to work with red teams, we're able to work with blue teams. For those that don't have it, we can purple team. There's a lot of ways to do this depending on the size of the company you are working with to be able to perform these exercises. At the same time, detection engineering focuses on creating and validating rules that enable quick, accurate threat identification. So all of this is made possible by our Attack IQs, our deep integrations across the customer environment, covering email gateways, firewalls, WAFs, EDRs, SIMs, and the list goes on. By ensuring we plug into every critical security layer, we can deliver more targeted and comprehensive validation, helping you, the trusted advisor, quickly uncover and remediate gaps. This ultimately strengthens the overall defense posture of your customers. Whoops, there we go. All right, so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Jose. I'm going to have him do a demo for you. Please ask as many questions as you like, as technical as you want, because we have the ability to answer those here right on the webinar today. So Jose, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Awesome, thanks, Mark. Let's go ahead and share my screen here. Awesome. All right, team. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through the Attack IQ Ready AEV platform. What I'm going to do first and foremost is walk through, a lot of this discovery stuff that we've been talking about. This is the first step. You can't defend what you can't see. So we'll start by first looking at some of the context and details that we pull back as part of this process, how a customer can establish that continuous discovery as part of that. From there, we can take a look at some of the testing that we can conduct as part of that, from the perspective of just basic control testing that can feed into this, along with threat-based testing as emergent threats come out. And then finally, we'll take a look at how we can provide a customer some prioritization, highlight some exposures, and help them actually fix some of the problems that they find. So that's what we want to walk you through today. Like you said, please ask questions along the way. We can we're monitoring chat and can come back to that, or just answer it at the end. So with that, to get started, this is actually the view that the customer is going to get when they first log into the platform. And essentially here we're highlighting, all the different, whether systems, vulnerabilities, or assets. And by assets, I mean these can be machines, these can be networks, these can be user identities that are being identified throughout the product. Now, how do we arrive at that information? This is going to be a mix of integrating with the technologies by the customer, For example, with things like Qualys or Nessus or Rapid7 as an example, with their EDR technology as an example. But also, as we're running MITRE TTPs, essentially, whether we're testing controls, whether we're emulating attacker behaviors, attackers are going to use discovery tactics, techniques, and procedures. And as we conduct those type of behaviors, we're also collecting that information and capturing it is what I'm going to show you here. So let's walk through this first piece, which is going to be the discovery piece. And here you can see first and foremost across the different types of assets that we have a list of different machines that were discovered as part of this process. We can actually see the vulnerabilities that we have available based on our integrations with our technologies. And then finally, a variety of different users and profiles and networks that we refine throughout our environment. The other thing that we do here, we're highlighting specifically some of the vulnerability or recommended actions. So as we're running and discovering different environments, we'll recommend different actions based on what we find in your environment and the details of that environment. For example, here we can see here, I have a Linux machine that happens to be in AWS that we're recommending that we run some Linux baseline testing. And then here we have some exposures, which essentially are things that customers should address. But I'll come back to this. Let's start off by taking a look at some of the details that we pull back and context that we pull back as part of our process. To start here, we can see a variety of different assets that were discovered. And I'll show you here, for example, these are a variety of different assets where we actually pulled the information directly from the Tenable data set. So the customer has their own instance of Tenable, and we're able to pull back information about each and every one of these assets and to include recommendations that we suggest and any other items that we might have discovered. The other thing, though, is we have here what we call Attack IQ discovery. So as part of our process, as we're running any one of these things, you can see here that this asset was discovered because we did a scan on the environment, meaning just like the attacker would do something like an Nmap scan or do a network share scan, this is how this was discovered. And we can even see, the different types of services running on this machine. In this case, we can clearly see SSH services running as an example as part of this process. Now, beyond assets here, we then have the vulnerabilities, where we highlight the vulnerabilities that were observed as part of this process. One of the things that we're doing and how the recommendations are put together is we actually just completed with MITRE the KVE project, so known vulnerabilities and exposures. What we do is instead of prioritizing all of the possible vulnerabilities in the environment, what we do is we focus on the KVEs where we know we have a direct link between that specific vulnerability and it actually being applied in the field by threat actors. So this is how we can provide recommendations on what type of things to test, what type of threats to test, and those sort of things. Now, with that in mind, how do we even get some of this information? Let's take a look at how we set up that discovery here. So here we have the discovery tab. And in order to set this up, the customer has quite a few ways to accomplish this. And we've been purposeful in this because we know that different customers have different setups, have different requirements, and may even have some environments that they simply cannot install an agent on. This is very, very applicable to our federal customers. As an example, if anyone on this call focuses on federal. But let me walk you through what I mean by that. And starting with, first and foremost, here we can establish continuous testing across the customer's environment. The way that this works is the customer can go ahead and define what are the different machines where we have an active agent running that they would like to conduct a variety of different discovery tactics that you see here. So Active Directory discovery, endpoint discovery, external network discovery, so you can just give us a CIDRs, and then finally, local network discovery. All that once configured. As you can see, I'm not going to set it up because I already have this here. It'll run continuously on the given day that you've set it up. In my case, I just set all these up to run on a weekly basis on Wednesday as part of that process. Now that's great. In this case, we have the agents. They're going to run every single week. The other thing I'd call out is, of course, we're going to let the customer run things ad hoc at any given moment. So for example, if I want to run, in this case, a discovery on the endpoint, I can select one or many endpoints where I want this to be conducted, and we can go ahead and run this now on demand. So the customer doesn't have to wait for that weekly run. We can go ahead and do that at any moment as part of that process. The other thing, though, that I want to call on, this is very critical here, is the fact that we also have released a concept of Flex D packages. So Flex is our agentless way of executing the MITRE TTPs. Just like we execute things with our agent, we can do those in an agentless fashion, essentially using Flex packages. Now with Flex D, what we're doing is we're actually Flex Discovery. We've actually packaged up these Flex packages so that the customer can, in this case, for example, download the Flex package and run it maybe as a one-off in a specific environment. This is super useful if we have customers that have disparate, systems in the field where they simply don't have access to internet or aren't allowed to connect those things. We can just run a simple Flex package, get the output of that Flex package, and then bring it back into the platform so that we have that discovery context. On our standard enterprise customers as well, we may have different environments where the customer simply cannot install an agent. So this is an opportunity for us to run testing, whether it's discovery or even some other testing, which I'll show you next, on these environments through these Flex packages so that we can still get, even if it's a one-off context from that environment, and get an understanding of it as well. The other thing I'll call out just as a use case, I think a big problem in cybersecurity is silos. We see that quite a lot, given that we do testing. What that means is, someone from the SOC team has to tell someone from the endpoint or firewall team that, things aren't working as well. What we find a lot is sometimes different groups can be very protective and not want an agent installed. They do not want to be scrutinized, right? Now, where am I leading with this story? We find that quite a lot of times getting in there with a simple Flex package, and look, if that person gets greater than 90% as an example prevention rate, that's great. Let them continue to do what they're doing. Maybe we do that once a year. But if that person is failing miserably, that environment is failing miserably, then I think as a SOC analyst, we just earn the right to say, look, we need to test this continuously, get it up to speed, and then ensure that it maintains that capability going forward. So it's really been introducing these Flex packages, a way of testing without having to install an agent, is super useful. Now, I don't know if you guys just saw that pop in, but as things are running, you see we're discovering different weaknesses in order to highlight them for the customer there. But before I go to the weaknesses, I want to give you a little bit more context about how the testing runs and the type of output that we have from a report perspective before we go back to weaknesses and show you that. So from a testing perspective here, you can see I have continuous testing across my security stack, in this case, content filter, AV, and EDR, as well as having the ability to run things on demand at any moment. This on-demand run is extremely useful, as your customers are getting a question of, from their CEO, from the executive, what are we doing against Turla? What's our ability to mitigate Turla as an example? Well, we can go ahead and select Turla here and run it and get that answer here in a moment to include, any weaknesses that come out of that as part of that process. Now, as these things run, we generate some reports. So let me show you some of the reports that we generate as part of this process. To start, here I have my security baseline report. This is focused around ensuring that the security controls, you can see all the different security controls that I'm testing, are effective. And what we'll do here is first and foremost, provide the customer with an overall score. This is the lab, so I'm not doing as well as your typical enterprise would be doing. I'm only have a coverage of about 45%. So that means out of 149 tests, out of 328 were the ones that were actually prevented or detected. From there, we can go ahead and take a look at what is our posture across my technology. So from EDR example, this is the prevention rate. This is the detection rate. Of course, we're going to highlight what the changes have been over time, and then a breakdown by individual TTP so we can see here what are the things that are being prevented and detected, and where might we have some gaps, at least here from a detection perspective. Then when we get in here into the WAF, we can also see some other items that failed in my environment. Now, as part of this reporting, we also provide mitigation recommendations. I'm not going to focus too much on the reports because the whole point of us having this concept of weaknesses is so that the reports are great, good for review, good for deep dive, but we want to give a place where as these things are running, we have a central location for our customers to address the gaps that are observed. We'll take a look at that next as a finishing touch for today. But before I do that, I also want to show you a threat-based report. In this case, we're running this PRC state-sponsored actor compromise. Here we have a CISO alert. Essentially, from a CISO alert perspective, just know that as a CISO alert comes out, our team will go actually release an emulation of that syslorder as part of our SLA. Now, in this case, we can see here, looks like in this case, we only have 33% coverage, given that only 2 out of 6 scenarios were prevented. And then we can see here that, these are the 2 scenarios that were not prevented. However, this one was. Now, a good thing to know about this thread is looks like we weren't able to actually get to stage 2 and we weren't able to get to stage 3. What that means is we're actually able to mitigate the threat and basically prevent it, from getting farther into it. So from that perspective here, we can see the attack graph that represents this. But essentially, this is a multi-stage attack, and in this environment here, I'm a little lost. In this environment here, we can see that we did do some stuff in stage 1, but because we blocked a critical phase, in this case, the dump LSAS, we weren't able to get to stage 2 and stage 3 because we're following the same logic that the attacker would here. This was a prerequisite step. The content and output of this was a requirement for the attacker to accomplish some of the other things downstream. So this is a great result from that perspective. Now, again, the reports are great for us to deep dive into the details, analyze the results. But what we've done is we've created this concept of exposures. With exposures, we're prioritizing them. We're prioritizing based on another research project we did with MITRE, M3TID, which is essentially just like MITRE from a CVE perspective, developed the CVSS score. MITRE ATT&CK has just developed a ME-THREAD ID, which we were a part of here at Attack IQ. Now here we have exposures, which are essentially, we've proven that these are possible. So let's take a look at one of these examples, access to insecurely stored credentials. What we're saying here is that exposure is that we were able to access the insecurely stored credentials. We're giving a description of the attack so that the customer understands what it means. And then a little link to the MITRE technique ID as well for that context. From there, we're going to provide some mitigation recommendations, whether it's step-by-step instructions as we're seeing here, or what we'll do is we'll provide some detection rules. Specifically here, you can see that from a detection rule perspective, we're providing signal rules. These rules are either developed in-house by Attack IQ or curated from the community. And what we've done here is we've created a framework where, whether you're a Carbon Black user, Palo Alto, CrowdStrike, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, here we have a query that you can simply copy, use it to do a quick query, add it as a detection rule going forward, and if you choose to do so, go ahead and implement it as a prevention. The idea here is that we don't want to just highlight the weaknesses and problems that we find within the environment, but actually provide an actionable solution, and that's what the signal rules are here that the customer can easily implement. The other thing here that you'll see is we provide the indicators of compromise. So if they simply wanted to hunt for this and search for it on their own and develop their own rule, just start by finding the event. They can also do that, assuming that there was no detection. And since it's a weakness, there was no detection in this instance. Now, finally, here we can see that, a detailed output of what was done. So the big thing here with Attack IQ is we do not want to be a black box. Like I mentioned earlier, this is going to be the SOC team maybe having to go to the firewall guy, the endpoint guy, and tell them, hey guys, this attack isn't being prevented. I need your help to mitigate it. Well, that other person's always going to push back in my experience. So what we've done here is we've gone out of our way to have very, very detailed logs here. And this is actually a simple log, but overall, essentially, you can see here the exact PowerShell command that was executed as part of this. This blue is representative of the standard out that was executed. And we can see that we were able to successfully, steal these credentials. And then we even present the credentials here. Now, what I want to show you, though, is we did redact the actual detail there. We are aware of sensitive information and are not going to display that. But this is this outside of the redaction, this is the exact standard out that would have been seen if the user was actively watching that command line as we executed the previous step. And then the other thing to call out is we can clean up after ourselves. So here we can see the cleanup as part of that process. Now, as we then have these things, reviewed, as we implement mitigations, then we just simply have to rerun things or let it run as part of the continuous testing paradigm that we've been talking about today in order to then, have this exposure removed, assuming that we can confirm that it is now being prevented or detected. Now, finally, the way that we can help our customers have an understanding of how they're doing is we have this overall score. So based on all the results that we have here, we present a score. The score is based off the M3 TID that I alluded to earlier. I'm happy to share some of those resources with you as a follow-on. But also here, what we're looking at is a tactic level results, meaning across all the things that were ran and the results, we're using that. But the other thing that we're doing is we're using the basis of, how prevalent was the testing. If we have a customer that has, 50 agents deployed across the environment, but they've only ran it against one machine, they're never going to be able to get an A. The idea with that is we want them to actually go ahead and test in a representative sample set within their environment. So they need to, deploy on more than one machine, and they'll get dinged if they don't go ahead and do that. And the last thing here is going to be, we can, switch to different time frames. So depending on what they want to focus on, they can do that. Beyond that, we will provide testing summaries. What are the type of tests that were conducted? What are the results within each of those tests? A description of the individual tests ran and how many times. Here we then have the breakdown of the individual scenarios or attacks, so we can see which ones are being mitigated the least. And then finally, a breakdown by individual test point. Here we can keep a historical record for any one of these test points, but also in this case, you can clearly see this machine is not doing well in comparison to the rest of my environment. So it really gives you that visibility from that perspective as well. So that's essentially the capability here. Like I said, as part of this process, this is going to be running on a continuous basis, and we'll continue to provide recommendations here based on what we observed, based on what we see. As the follow-on happens and the testing occurs, exposures are going to be the way for the customers to identify and address some of the biggest gaps they have in their environments. So that's all I have for today, team. Thank you for your time. Definitely will reach out to you as a follow-on to today. But I'm sending it back to you, Mark.
Excellent. Thanks, Jose. Really good job. Let me go ahead and switch back to my screen over here. If you give me just a second, we'll get that all set up for you guys, and then we'll do some Q&A. So, whoops, there we go. All right. So, what Jose is kind of showing here is how
you're muted, Mark. Can you swap your display?
Whoops. Can you hear me now?
I think you're in presenter mode.
Hold on one sec, guys. Sorry.
Team, I think if you guys have any questions, chat, happy to address any of those questions. If you'd like to follow up or like to see some of this, get access to this, just reach out to us, partners@attackiq.com. Mark had that up for a short second, but it's partners@attackiq.com, so pretty easy to remember.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, all right. Jose, thanks. Sorry about that. Let me just see if this will actually do what it's supposed to do. Just give me 1 second, and we will try and get this thing loaded for you. I want to make sure you guys have the ability to actually see what we're doing here. All right, there we go. Nick, can you see that okay?
Yep.
Okay, good. All right, so I think we're pretty clear at this point what the value is. This is really making sure that customers are ready when things happen. They're informed. They're using exposure validation, intelligence, etc. We also want to make sure that the business risk is managed appropriately and that people upstream really know what's going on and can see what's happening. And then to make sure that the resiliency of the platform and the infrastructures are in place to do continuous threat exposure management. This slide, I think, is the one that Jose was referencing. So this is how you get a hold of us. It's pretty straightforward. We did a webinar yesterday. I was on the phone talking to people afterwards. More than happy to have conversations and bring the right people into the room to get your questions answered, to help you on sales deals, and to make this a success for you and your customers. Nick, what do we got for questions?
Yeah, we have a few questions in the chat. First one, Just is Attack IQ getting out of the BAS business?
Yeah, excellent question. We are not getting out of the breach and attack simulation business. That is all part and parcel of moving into the adversarial exposure validation environment. So we're actually adding to what we've done in the past versus taking something away. You'll see this over the next several months, and we will continue to add more and more features into our platforms to get us to a point that will be ahead of where pretty much every other organization is on the vendor side, and it will definitely make an impact to your customers. Now, something to keep in mind: selling Attack IQ or any other kind of AEV solution does take time. So if we're in a situation where you're going to be presenting or need to know what's going on down the path, we are more than happy to do a roadmap discussion with you and help you get there, so your customers feel like they are buying the latest and greatest, widescreen television. You don't want to buy a 60-inch when the 80-inch is coming out. So we're here to help you do that and make sure that you put your best foot forward in selling these solutions. What else you got, Nick?
Let's see. We have three more in here as of right now. Is AEV going to align with CTEM, and is it going to be a new Gartner measurement or Magic Quadrant?
Good one. So in that CTEM discussion that we went through today, you'll see that Attack IQ is aligning very closely to sections of CTEM. What we will be producing for you from an educational standpoint, as well as from a sales standpoint, is where does the Attack IQ solution actually solve for requests in the framework, so that you could say, okay, this is all taken care of by this Attack IQ solution. You, company A, have to set up the organizational structure so that we know what to test against, and then be able to report on. So yeah, it is absolutely going to solve for some of the CTEM questions that come up. And it's important because I think a lot of customers are now seeing CTEM or other types of frameworks as important to driving their business forward, because it allows them to align their business to those frameworks as well. The second part of that question, Nick, what was it?
Uh, is it going to be a new Gartner measurement or Magic Quadrant?
Got it. Okay, so if you guys are all familiar with Magic Quadrants, you know how those operate. AEV is going to be not necessarily a Magic Quadrant, but it is going to be a measurement that Gartner is going to be looking at when they are evaluating vendors and where they play in that space. So yeah, they will be looking at AEV very, very closely, and we want to make sure we align with Gartner, because we know that all of the major Fortune 1000, et cetera, look at Gartner as sort of this guide to where they should go as well. What
Thank
else you got?
you. Two more in here. What is the best way to approach a customer that has no AEV experience?
Oh boy, that's that's probably the toughest question that's been asked. So the first thing in that scenario, as a sales scenario, is to really have your questions set out so you have a pathway to get them to a point of not understanding and back them into what they do understand. So if they don't have an understanding of AEV, back them up to breach and attack and make sure they understand that. Because if you can get to a platform of understanding, you will be able to walk them into what they don't know. We will be providing you with content that will help you go through those sales steps. It'll probably be out over the next few weeks, but it will literally take you and your customer through that questioning set of steps. I wouldn't necessarily read from it. I would certainly take it into your voice and work through where you find that they're missing information, take a step back to where they do have a solid foundation, and then move forward into it. And we'll be able to put those pieces together for you as well. You'll see it in both the document format, but you will also see it probably in our academy So if you're not lined up with Attack IQ Academy yet, you definitely want to be, because there's lots and lots of information there. And I think we also have a dummies guide coming out, dummies guide to AEV. So you'll see that coming out from us as well in the very near future.
I will go ahead and put the link to Attack IQ Academy in the chat. Also reach out to partners at attackiq.com if you would like to be registered in our partner academy as well, which goes a little bit more into the selling of Attack IQ side of things, both from just as a salesperson and a engineer as well. Then we have one more question that Jose answered, but I'll just read it out for everybody. Where does the vulnerability and threat intel data come from? And Jose responded, the threat intel was from us here at Attack IQ, and the vulnerability data was via our integration.
Okay. Is that all of them, Nick?
That is all of them.
All right, excellent. Everybody, thank you very much for attending. We try to keep these things less than an hour. We're getting up close to an hour. So again, I appreciate all of you hanging in there, and hopefully we provided you with some solid information. We'll be following up with you over the next few weeks and in the next few months as we introduce new products and new feature sets. So you'll be able to stay on top of your game, and we're here to help you along the way. So don't hesitate to shoot us a note at partners@attackiq.com. If you want to hit me directly, my email is there as well. And I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much.